I'm Laura Bonnell, and this is the Living with Cystic Fibrosis podcast coming to you from Detroit. Please subscribe and even rate and comment on our podcasts when it moves you. I learn something new with every podcast, and I'm always inspired by the people that are showcased here. We don't give medical advice. You need to connect with your doctor for that. I hope that this Living with Cystic Fibrosis podcast educates you and sparks some volunteering or advocacy. The CF community needs people like you. Thanks to our sponsors, Viatris, Genentech, and Vertex for their support. I saw an article about Rena Barrow and her family in a CF Foundation newsletter. Rena has 2 kids with cystic fibrosis. Jarrod is 22 and Jahsir is 3 years old. And through the years, she has seen a big discrepancy in care for people of color. Fortunately, there are CF modulators that her kids can access. 2 of Rena's 4 kids have CF, and she is speaking out for Black, Indigenous, and people of color in something the acronym is BIOPIC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And their experience with CF is sadly still pretty common. Between 2001 and 2005, she and her husband tried to figure out what health condition their oldest son had, and they were accused of not feeding him or caring for him properly prior to his diagnosis based on older beliefs and a misunderstanding about who can be born with this genetic disease called cystic fibrosis. And as a reminder, anyone can be born with cystic fibrosis. It is not a white disease. So it's great to, again, get information and educate and hear from Rena about the journey that she's been through and how she's trying to help educate and change the future for the cystic fibrosis community that impacts people of color. And Rena, it is great to have you on this podcast. I was so pleased to learn about you and to learn about all of your efforts. And I'm not surprised anymore about people of color being misdiagnosed. So tell us some of your suggestions that you got from people when your sons were diagnosed. People thinking maybe that the diagnosis was wrong and you should have sickle cell. I mean, I saw that in everything I was reading about you. So how did your CF journey start?
Oh, yeah, sure. Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm very excited to be here and share a little bit of me with the world. So our CF journey started many years ago when I have a 22-year-old and also a 3-year-old, both with cystic fibrosis. So for the first child, for a long time, we knew that he was sick with something. We just didn't know what the something was. Like we were always at the emergency room and at the doctor's offices, and everyone just said maybe he has like a stomach virus all the time.
And you're talking about Jarrod, your son Jarrod.
Yep, Jarrod, that's the oldest child, 22 years old.
Okay.
So our journey, our quest started from that point, but we didn't get diagnosed until he was 4 years old. And so I believe that a lot of people during that time, a lot of physicians and care teams, they overlooked us because it just wasn't common, even though we are from a mixed background, being from New Orleans, Louisiana. And I just believe that during that time, it was very difficult with navigating the healthcare process. I felt all alone by myself, me and my family, because when you don't know what's going on, it's very hard to put a name to something that you don't know about. And so for many years with Jarrod, we struggled in trying to get him diagnosed and just having anyone to believe that we're not feeding him because we were blamed for not feeding him because he was severely malnourished and always like very small he never met his growth mark. And so that was always a question on like, do you guys feed your kid or, what's going on here? And we were always put on the defense when speaking about his health care. And we were finally diagnosed with him. And he was a growing young guy. And I remember being pregnant with my third child and going to the OBGYN. And at the time, Jarrod was our only CF child. And I let this doctor know, like, hey, I'm pregnant. We have a possibility that our child could have cystic fibrosis. So I remember a nurse bringing us into a room where we discussed genetics and things of that nature. I was 7 months pregnant with my daughter. And she asked us, as parents, she said, are you sure that it's not sickle cell? And at the time, our oldest CF child, he was 10 years old. And so it kind of like really threw us for a loop because like we had never encountered that experience. People always would say like, oh my gosh, you guys are Black, you have cystic fibrosis. Are you mixed or do you have like white people in your family? But we never had anyone to blatantly ask us like, are we sure it's not sickle cell? And we've been dealing with his condition for at least 10 years. Mm-hmm. And so that was new to us. And we actually ended up late in pregnancy, 7 months pregnant, we actually ended up changing OB doctors because of that question, because we just didn't feel like we weren't heard. And the child that I was carrying, my daughter at the time, she actually turned out she didn't have cystic fibrosis. So that was a good thing. But fast forward to our toddler, we made everyone aware that this is a possibility that this child could have cystic fibrosis. And I felt like we were being heard. I mean, because we talked about it with the OB doctor. I talked about it with the pediatrician because the pediatrician had been all of my kids' pediatrician throughout the years. And so he was on board.
And they knew that you had a child already with CF, right?
Right. Yep. Because they inherited this child from New Orleans from Hurricane Katrina. So when we got here, Jarrod was so new diagnosed with cystic fibrosis at the time that when we got to Georgia, when we evacuated from Hurricane Katrina, he hadn't even been acclimated with his new CF team in New Orleans.
Okay.
So we're in Atlanta, Georgia. I didn't mention that earlier. But so it was a long time coming, and the doctors here had inherited him from a toddler, so they pretty much knew our family. And I remember with my toddler now, the 3-year-old, I went to many of the healthcare providers I was seeing, and I said, hey, we have an older child with cystic fibrosis. It's a possibility that our baby may have CF, and we counseled with the geneticist, and they wanted to do the amniocentesis, but we refused that because, why disrupt the pattern of that? Because that also has risk. And come to find out, I'm not really certain, like into science, if that would have had a positive result for our family because our baby still missed the newborn screen. He passed it, and they said he didn't have cystic fibrosis. Because his mutations were not detected. Mm. So we just been through a lot with trying to figure out, how, why, and then having to always be on the defensive side of healthcare and over-explain our disease state.
Right. And then
per se,
being misdiagnosed because of the newborn screening is very common because in Michigan, we only test for 66 of the 2,000 mutations. In another state, I can't remember if it's Massachusetts or if it's Texas or what other state it is, but one only checks newborn screening for 4 mutations. So all the people of color, of course, will get missed because they're only checking either for the most common,
right?
The white
European
mutations. Yep. And I keep saying this over and over in podcasts when I talk to people who are misdiagnosed like this, but I don't know how it still keeps happening, why awareness hasn't been raised. And so that happens to you with this is your 4th child, and pronounce his name for me.
His name is Jahsir.
Jahsir. So with him, he is missed in newborn screening. and the doctors tell you, oh, you should be happy. He doesn't have CF.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep. The same doctor that inherited my CF baby, actually, when we evacuated to this state 18 years ago, is the same doctor that said I should be happy with my new baby's newborn screen result because he passed it and he signed it in front of me. And like when he signed it, like tears were streaming from my eyes, like because I really hit a roadblock because he's not listening. I'm telling him like my baby is very salty and like I'm licking him every day. And I have like friends to come over and they're consoling me and they're licking him too. And like, I know that my mind isn't playing tricks on me. Some days he's saltier than others after a bath. And why is this? And he kept saying, well, newborns have different things that they go through. So it isn't uncommon for him to use 12 diapers a day. And I'm like, well, I've never had a newborn that used this many diapers and they didn't have cystic fibrosis.
Right. And the saltiness is, in case anyone doesn't know, is a huge red flag for cystic fibrosis. And our dog used to always lick our girl's feet and, parts of her because they were so salty.
Yeah.
So it's a huge red flag, especially if you're telling a doctor this, that it should be a ding, ding, ding. They should really act and wonder about cystic fibrosis.
Yeah. The salt comes from, there's a depletion on a sodium chloride channel that makes the people with CF excrete that salt in an astronomical amount all the time. They don't even have to be sweating. They could do the bare minimum and they taste like salt. And so my baby, he's doing a bare minimum.
Right.
Because he's a newborn and he's salty. And I'm like trying to explain this to the doctor. And he went and he said, I'll be right back. And he went to his computer, he printed the newborn screen and he signed it in front of me. And it was like a bill of rights. Like that's how I felt at the time. I'm like, okay, is this some kind of passage or what is this that I'm going through? Because like the way that he signed it, it was so irony. Like he was persistent and determined that the newborn screen was correct. And it's like, how do we get pediatricians and doctors on board to know that there are some inaccuracies,
right,
and that more testing needs to be followed through with without the reluctancy.
And then from there, tell us what you did after he signs that newborn screening and you still know your child has CF.
Okay, so from that point, tears were streaming. Like I still remember that moment. Like I was bawling in his office. He signs it, and then I call my husband on the phone and I say, I say I have good news, and I guess I should be happy about it, but I'm not. And I'm like, something is wrong. I said the doctor said that the baby doesn't have cystic fibrosis. He passed the newborn screen, but I just feel like something isn't right. And he was like, well, yeah, maybe we just go to the next step. And I said, okay. So I got in a car and I came back home and I called down to Jarrod at this time, the oldest CF child. He's an adult now, so he's not at the children's center anymore. He's at an adult center. So I sent an email to one of the nurses that I knew there from when he went. And I said, hey, I have a new baby. I'm not sure if you guys are aware, but I believe this baby has cystic fibrosis. Could you please help me? I said, I went to the pediatrician and he's telling me that the newborn screen results are accurate. And so from that point, that nurse sent my email to the nurse practitioner, and she was able to go into the newborn screen state system, and she pulled up the results, and she said, oh, yeah, it does show that he passed. But she said, Rena, I'm going to tell you, if you feel like you have she called me on the phone and she said, if you feel like you have a baby and this baby has cystic fibrosis, then I believe you. This baby has cystic fibrosis because nobody else would know better than you.
Wow.
So she said, you go back to the doctor's office and explain to them. She said, we can call them if you need us to pass along this information or if you're comfortable with telling them. But they recommend that any full sibling in a household is tested anyway. So she said, use that and let him know, and that way he can send the test to the hospital for a sweat test. And I said, okay. So I did that. And then we went for the first sweat test, and they couldn't find the order. And then they found it, and they said the test result came back inconclusive. So from that point, we had to wait 21 days.
Oh my gosh.
To retest. Yeah, that's their guidelines. To wait 21 days to have a retest done. So we waited the 21 days and we retested. He had to send another testing, I guess, file back to the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
But we tested again, and sure enough, the baby had cystic fibrosis. And it was just like, see, I knew it.
Right. I mean, and then at that point, you feel, I would imagine, many things, but did you feel vindicated? Were you sad? Were you like, what was going through your mind once the sweat test came back positive?
Yeah, once the sweat test came back positive, I felt very angry. And I just remember thinking like, okay, maybe I have to go through this process of feeling this way. Like I felt happy because I knew that it was something. However, I just felt like we shouldn't have had to experience this trauma for 4 months. Like it was a long 4 months. Like every day I would be crying. My kids come in the room and they see tears just streaming from my face, and I'm just rocking the baby because I know something is wrong. And so I felt very angry, and I'm like, what could be done about this? And who do I contact? And I contacted at least 25 lawyers in the state to find out like what could be done. And they all said like, because the baby has a genetic disease, there's nothing much that could be done because you would have to prove that the hospital was negligent. Well, I'm like, well, they are negligent. Well, then the next question is, well, how are they negligent? I'm like, well, because they didn't, listen to me from my perspective. So they were like, well, no, that's not good enough. How else I'm like, because the testing was faulty, but then come to find out the testing is not administered by the hospital, it's administered by the state. And so, yeah, out of 25 lawyers, I got 0 people to help me out in that case. So then I went and, try to reach back out to the foundation to say like, hey, this is an issue, why is this? And just have so many questions. And from that point, they developed a lot of different work groups to address newborn screening and racial diversity and equity and inclusion and different, I guess, outlets for people who look like my family. And so that has been good that all of this has come from that. However, I was very angry.
What did the doctor say? I mean, did you share your anger with him or her? And what was their response?
So I didn't share my anger with the doctor because I'm not one of those people to beat someone up when they're down.
Mm-hmm.
So I could tell that in his voice that when he called me, it was a Wednesday, and he goes, "Hi, Mom." And I'm like, "Hi." And I knew that if he called, it was for a reason. And he goes, "Well, I just wanted to let you know that you were right. Your baby does have cystic fibrosis. I'm so sorry." I mean, it could have been a better apology or a better response to all that I had been through, especially at his office for those 4 months. But I just said, I'll put it in God's hands. And, the fact that he had to call me to tell me that he was wrong,
Mm-hmm.
okay, that the newborn screening was wrong, was good enough for me. So I didn't go back and like fuss or holler, or, scream that I could do. I just let God deal with it.
And that was 4 months that he was not treated for cystic fibrosis. Did it impact his health early on in those first 4 months? How is he doing now?
That is a great question, actually. It did impact his health in the first 4 months because now he has severe feeding issues. So he's internalized that food is bad, okay? Because he would cry, like we would have 14 to 16 hour days of him crying and us like on Amazon trying to buy probiotic drops, different brands, Gerber, BioGaia, like all of the organic expensive drops, these things, they give you like 3 mLs for like $50, and we're buying different bottles to try to soothe the baby.
Because his digestive system was hurting?
Because his digestive system was hurting. Every time we feed him, it would come out. He would use the restroom, and we knew that we had a problem because we were going through boxes of Pampers.
Yeah. And he wasn't on enzymes at the time because he didn't have a diagnosis.
Right. And so he's internalized food as being a bad thing. And so in retrospect, he actually needs feeding therapy, and he's on a waiting list for it. And it has to be intensive feeding therapy because he has like food aversion. So he only eats the same 5 foods every single day. Nothing changes.
Wow.
And that's the only way to keep him nutritious. Like we go through Ensures and Orgain drinks, the pediatric versions, chocolate and vanilla. Mm-hmm. He likes those. And that's how we are able to maintain his nutrition. But at a young age, he's internalized, hey, food is bad. So he stopped eating.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so when are you going to get him in that therapy? How long of a wait is it?
So he was actually recently diagnosed with autism. So aside from having cystic fibrosis, he now has autism. He's doing speech and occupational therapy and ABA, and he's going to be starting school in late October. And in the feeding therapy, we had some setbacks because he developed eosinophilic esophagitis, which is coined EOE. And we had to go through where they did a procedure, they did a bronchoscopy, they put a tube down his throat to see, I guess, the inflammation in his throat before they would consider him a person that they would have for the feeding therapy program. And he had high eosinophils. So we treated that for 3 months, and then he went back for another procedure where they rescoped him, and his eosinophils were down. I mean, still elevated, but not as severely as much as they were before. And now we're back on the waiting list, and I'm not sure when they'll be calling, but when they do, it will be intensive, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday.
That is so much. I mean, how are you doing as a mom? You have 4 kids, 2 who have cystic fibrosis, and your youngest also having autism. How are you doing?
I'm actually doing pretty well. I have a good support system of friends. Like my friends are like sisters. I don't have many, but the ones that I do have, they're really good. And they always look out for me and my well-being. And I'm grateful for that. I mean, as any mom going through a lot of things, I have good days and I have bad days. And on my bad days, I allow for them to be bad days. Like if I want to cry, then that's what I'm going to do for that day, because maybe I need to get that out of my system. But for the most part, I just keep God at the forefront, and I ask him to help me to do everything that my kids need. Okay, I don't want to have more. I don't want to have less, but just help me to have everything that they need so that I'm able to provide for them and help my baby, help me to help him. Because when he's doing well, then I'm doing well. Then if he's not good and not receiving care, then I'm not doing well. So that's pretty much how I get by. I don't go on vacation much as I used to. But I mean, we don't get to pick what we're going to have, right? Mm-hmm. So you just have to, for me, I just take what God's given me and say, okay, thank you. Could you please help me provide the tools that I need to get through this or to help the baby?
You are such an inspiration with how this process started for you and everything that you're dealing with. I really appreciate you sharing your story. It's really important to get it out there because there's so much that needs to be changed as it relates to cystic fibrosis. And so you started trying to educate the CF community about what you've been going through, correct?
Yeah.
You formed a group, and the acronym is BIOPIC, right?
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about that and why you started it.
Sure. So I started Two Salty Oaks Foundation to raise awareness of cystic fibrosis and try to go back and educate the minority group, because that has been where my disconnection has been. So when I say that our pediatrician is actually an African-American male, my OBGYN who laughed hysterically that we were licking our baby was an African-American woman. And so my group, Two Salty Oaks, is aiming to educate everyone and really reach in depth in our own community to say, hey, we do get this disease. It does exist. Because I've learned that a lot of African-American doctors, they don't go as far. Well, of course, they're very smart, right? Not going to take away from them being doctors. But what I'm saying is that they don't get the same ways to tap into specialties as their white counterparts. Maybe that looks like they don't have enough money, so they have to stop where they are in learning, right? Maybe they weren't invited to go into that specialty. Maybe they don't know a lot about it. So my group is aiming to help people realize that there are other specialties that Black people are affected by that you could go into getting out of medical school. It's also to educate pediatricians that the newborn screen is not accurate. Two Salty Oaks is the name of my foundation. The reason why I have it as two is because of my two boys. Mm-hmm. Salty is because they're always salty. It relates to cystic fibrosis so perfectly to me. And then Okes is because they're African-American males. And that's what Oak stands for, OKE. And so that's why I chose that name. And I hope to do a lot of things in 2024 to bring about awareness and just educate everyone, to let everyone know, hey, this disease does exist. Black people do get it too. Would you like to know how? Would you like to know how we're affected? We deserve healthcare too. And so that's the reason, our focus for my organization.
And the BIOPIC stands for Black Indigenous People of Color.
Yes.
And that's part of your foundation too?
Yes.
Tell us about the Indigenous community. How big is CF in that community?
Cystic fibrosis is very big in the Hispanic community and also in the Indigenous community. There's a lot of people that are affected. I hear stories all the time of how parents, they have maybe a translation issue, right? And so it's hard for them to even know about the resources that are available because maybe they don't know, or maybe they aren't aware of what is existent as a person with CF, or as a parent or guardian of someone with cystic fibrosis. So I want to reach back out to all people and bring everyone together and let them know that, hey, this is a real thing, and the CF community deserves support and recognition. We deserve the same recognition as our Caucasian counterparts for having the same disease. We shouldn't have to fight to say, hey, I want to be at the table too. I have this thing going on. It's called cystic fibrosis. Yes, you have it, but it's not the same as being a Black person. And because my worries for my oldest child, he's a male, he's a Black male, and we're in 2023. And my greatest worry is him driving down the street and he has Creon in his pocket. And how would the police take that if they don't know that it exists for Black people too? So I just want to bring everyone on board and educate them and let them know that, hey, cystic fibrosis is real. And it affects a lot of different people.
And that is a huge thing that a white person with CF would not have to be concerned about, driving in the car with, pills in their pocket. I mean, what other issues and challenges are there for people of color that maybe we as Caucasians don't think about as it relates to cystic fibrosis?
Yeah, there's a lot of like undisclosed biases. Sometimes when you go to like doctor's offices, you feel those biases. I remember early on with my first child, I actually felt some of those biases, like from his social worker at the time. Like the things that they ask you in a pediatric setting, it still kind of comes off like, are you feeding your child? They don't ask that per se, but they kind of hint to it, like your child is excessively small, what's going on, or how are you taking your enzymes? How are you giving your child their medication? What does that look like? And, you get to feel like it's scripted almost, and you are reluctant to answer those kind of questions because if you already are someone who's like myself, who had a hard time being diagnosed and having also those questions, and then you go to a healthcare professional, they're asking you those questions, it's kind of like you're reluctant to answer because you don't know if the aim is to take your kid away from you.
Mm-hmm.
If they feel that the kid is being mistreated or some sort like that. Other things are that Black people worry about is stigma. So like one of the people that I know who actually have cystic fibrosis, she's a Black adult. Okay, so for her, she went to high school and she had her pills on her and she was trying to take her medication, and this resource officer, he seen her and like he called the police on her for trying to take her medication in high school. So it's like, okay, why wasn't he aware that, she has this condition? Like, how could this happen to her?
Mm-hmm.
And I think she's in her 30s now, but this is something that Black people deal with all the time. And it's just so unfortunate because we want to be able to, be normal and have cystic fibrosis too. Why do we always have to stand out as like a unicorn community? I mean, being a unicorn isn't a bad thing, but
it is in this case, right? I mean, you don't, you want everyone to understand and to give you the empathy and everything that you deserve, and then doctors to just treat you like everyone else. So, yeah. Do you see things that are changing at all? Do you see that doctors are getting it more? I mean, just with your efforts and the efforts of others, do you see that things are changing? I mean, we have a lot of work to do with newborn screening from Michigan to California across the country for sure.
Yeah. I do see a change within the CF organization, the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. I see the change there. However, their foundation, they can't really implement changes to like the healthcare professionals and facilities. They can only control themselves from within. So with their organization, there's been a lot of change and new implementations and new processes and things of that nature. However, I would like to see more in a healthcare setting, especially for our adult CFers. Like, for instance, my son back in 2021, he recently moved over to the adult CF center, and he had an issue where his PICC line, it must have gave out or something. And I sent them to the emergency room, and we're in a time with COVID. And they ended up having to do lung surgery on him, emergency lung surgery. But he's new to the adult cystic fibrosis center. So I say, well, let me go on a portal and let them know that, hey, he's only 19 years old and he's having emergency lung surgery. I can't go in because it's COVID. And I was met back with, can your request wait until the doctor is back in office in 3 weeks?
Oh my gosh.
Right. So it's just the same kind of like adequacy that we would give to anyone in this situation. Like, how do we get our healthcare professionals to empathize with us that, we do exist and our concerns matter as well? Like, this is a cystic fibrosis patient. He's going through emergency lung surgery by himself. He's 19 years old and he's new to your group and you haven't embraced him. And like, it always like plagues the back of my mind, like what would have been the outcome if he was a Caucasian male trying to do this alone with somebody would have fostered him in. But his doctors are really great from that point. That was one bad nurse at that clinic, but it's just an unfortunate circumstance that we shouldn't have been met with during such a difficult time.
Absolutely. And how is Jarrod doing as he is an adult and now, like, I'm guessing, has to speak to doctors on his own? Is he finding that he's able to kind of, get through his CF journey and get the attention and the answers and the medications and all that he needs?
Yes, he is actually. He's able to speak with his healthcare professionals, and for the things that he can't or he doesn't know, or if he has a question, I always send them a message on the portal for him. So things are really good for him. His health is pretty okay for someone with cystic fibrosis as of now. He did have a long healthcare journey scare in 2021, but now he's really good.
That's wonderful to hear. And your youngest, he is on his way, hopefully. I mean, do you feel like he's on his way as he's getting help?
He is on his way. I still have to over explain his condition and make sure that he's treated and be his advocate when we do go to his therapy appointments and things for his autism, because they don't know much about cystic fibrosis at all. So I just have to make sure that I'm strong and advocating for him and making sure that, hey, he's susceptible to germs. Make sure that you're wiping those toys off before, you give them to him to play with, so that way he's not getting sick. And everyone has been understanding, but I just still have to over explain. So I think coming up in 2024, I look forward to some good things from my foundation, such as brochures and flyers and pamphlets on how to treat someone with cystic fibrosis and what that looks like. So that everyone could be on board and giving people the help that they need and deserve.
And in show notes is the link to your website for people to get in touch with you if they want to. It's exciting that you have, more planned for 2024. Are people contacting you now? Are you hearing from a lot of people of color who are sharing their experiences with you?
I was a part of the racial justice work group for the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. So there's a lot of members in there who have shared their stories, or we've shared our stories with one another and spoke about it. For 2 years now, we've been working on this work group, and CF Foundation has actually we've made some recommendations, and they have put them into the implementation process. So that's really good and big news. But yeah, some people have reached out to me to let me know that, hey, I see the work that you're doing. I like your story. Well, I like, the fact that you're advocating and, about your story is pretty sad. I have gotten those reviews where people say, that story, it really makes me cry to read it. And I'm like, yeah, I know I'm so sorry, but it's true. So I wanted to share it just in case there's other people out there who have been through what we've been through or have the similar experiences that we had with just trying to find our place, every place.
Well, I hope that we start hearing less and less about people of color being misdiagnosed. I really hope that turns around quickly and that we can educate more people about all the discrepancies and the underdiagnosis facing people of color. And thank you for all that you do for this CF community and for sharing your story with us.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for having me here today. I greatly appreciate it. This is my first podcast. So I look forward to hopefully many more to come. But hey, thank you so much for having me. It was very nice to meet you, and hug your two girls for me.
Absolutely. And we're so honored that this is your first podcast. So thanks for coming on and sharing your story. And yeah, I'm sure we'll be hearing a lot more about you. And please keep us posted about, your sons and yourself. And we wish you the best.
Thank you so much. I greatly appreciate it, Laura.
The original music in this podcast is performed by Kevin Allen, who happens to have cystic fibrosis.
We all got our worries and fears. I know what's got you frustrated, but loving you is so alright.
This has been the Living with Cystic Fibrosis podcast. For more information and to learn more about the Bonnell Foundation, visit our website at thebonnellfoundation.org. That's the BONNELL Foundation.org. This podcast was sponsored by Viatris, Genentech, and Vertex. It was produced by Jag and Detroit Podcasts. Follow our show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening right now.